Have you ever heard this myth that goldfishes have a memory span of about 3 seconds? No wonder why they can swim around in a small bowl, thinking as if they were exploring new depths of the ocean. And if that was true, would it be so bad if we were like Dory in Nemo for some things? And that is learning. A lot of people believe that forgetting is the enemy of learning, but evident researches by Robert Bjork has found quite the opposite. It turns out that our brains must intentionally forget some information in order to get rid of all those unimportant things in our lives. Forgetting is a friend of learning is the implication that one must intentionally forget something in order to enhance it the next time that learning takes place. Robert Bjork is a distinguished professor of psychology at the University of California. His research focuses on human learning and memory. In his theory of this use, there are two indices, storage strength and retrieval strength. Say you wanted to remember your current address. You would be able to do so immediately because you have learned it and instilled it into your memory and recalled it consistently. But what if you wanted to remember the address from where you lived when you were a child? You might take some time to recall that information, since you have previously learned it but have not recently used it or retrieved it in a long time. How about if you wanted to remember the address of your friend's house that you have just visited a couple of days ago? You'll be able to recall it right away because you have just recently retrieved that information. But after a few days, you won't be able to remember it because you have not learned and stored that information into your memory. Several centuries of studies and researches have reassessed how learning works.
Here's a way to picture what's going on. When you first begin to understand something, for example, how to solve a problem, the neural pattern you form is there, but very weak, kind of like the faint pattern at the top of our pinball machine analogy here. When you solve the problem again, fresh from the start, without looking at the solution, you begin deepening that neural pattern, kind of like the darker pattern you see here in the middle. And when you have the problem down cold, so you can go over each step completely and concisely in your mind without even looking at the solution, and you've even had practice on related problems, why then the pattern is like this dark, firm pattern you can see towards the bottom of the pinball frame. Practice makes permanent.
From the book How We Learn by Carey Benedict, which is a collective of neural studies and researches about learning, where he talks about the importance of forgetting. When learning something, it is important that we forget some things in order for the new information to replace the old. For example, the word steel, which means a metal gray alloy made of carbon and iron and other elements, to the other word steal, which means to take the property of another or others without permission. When using either word, your brain needs to block the other word out. Forgetting is our brain's way of filtering out information we don't need in order to arrange them in an orderly manner. For example, when changing your email password, your brain needs to forget the old one so that you can remember the new one. Forgetting can also help us build an even stronger memory. In 1885, Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist, did some research work and experimental study on memory and learning, using himself as a subject to find out how long he was able to retain information after several given periods. He discovered what is called the forgetting curve, which reveals the decrease of our ability to retain information over time. His theory explains that as time passes, we lose memory over the things we learn within a couple of weeks, unless that information is practiced and recalled. From the graph, we can see that if we don't do anything with our learning, we will lose over 50% of information within the first hour. Ebbinghaus also found that learning also depends on the number of times that information is retained. To overcome the forgetting curve, you must practice.
When you're learning, what you want to do is study something. Study it hard by focusing intently. Then take a break, or at least change your focus to something different for a while. During this time of seeming relaxation, your brain's diffuse mode has a chance to work away in the background and help you out with your conceptual understanding. Your neural mortar, in some sense, has a chance to dry. If you don't do this, if instead you learn by cramming, your knowledge base will look more like this, all in a jumble with everything confused, a poor foundation.
So how do we forget to remember? The first method is called memorized repetition by Ebbinghaus, which is a technique that helps you strengthen your memory after learning something new. The first practice should be done right after you learn something. The second practice should be done about 15 to 20 minutes after the first practice takes place. In the meantime, you should go and do something that you like. While the third practice should be done about 6 to 8 hours after the initial learning has taken place. And lastly, the fourth practice should take place 24 hours after the initial learning. The second method is called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is a spaced out practice. Practicing a little every day with space in between will help your memory become more ingrained than practicing all at once. In learning, you should space out your practices into mini sessions with a decent amount of time in between each one, instead of practicing everything in one go. For example, say you plan to read the entire book in one day, taking about 6 hours at once. You might want to split your reading into mini sessions, perhaps 2 hours a day in 3 days total. Because if you cram everything all at once, your brain will not be able to take in all that information. Just like this brick wall. If you don't let the mortar dry before laying more bricks on top of your wall will eventually break down and collapse.
When you encounter something new, you often use your working memory to handle it. If you want to move that information into your long-term memory, it often takes time and practice. To help with this process, use a technique called spaced repetition. This technique involves repeating what you're trying to retain, but what you want to do is space this repetition out, repeating a new vocabulary word or a problem-solving technique, for example, over a number of days. Extending your practice over several days does make a difference. Research has shown that if you try to glue things into your memory by repeating something 20 times in one evening, for example, it won't stick nearly as well as if you practice it the same number of times over several days. This is like building the brick wall we saw earlier. If you don't leave time for the mortar to dry, that is, time for the synaptic connections to form and strengthen, you won't have a very good structure.
The third method is called interleaving. This is a technique for practicing with blended subjects or topics. For example, if you have to review several books with multiple topics, instead of reading them in a fixed orderly manner, you might want to interleave those topics into a random manner. This method supports research recently done which reveals that you should not focus on just one topic for a long period of time, due to the fact that your brain needs to make random connections with other information. To help us get a better understanding of a certain topic, we should use interleaving practice. Just like exercising, you want to put together a program consisting of different exercises such as running, weightlifting, push-ups, and planking to help strengthen different muscles of the body. Interleaving is also fun and can make your study more interesting. The fourth method is recall and test, which is a kind of self-test technique to help us see what we can remember. This technique is to read a passage from a book or whatever you're studying on, and then close the book or look away to see what you can remember. This way of practicing is way better than rereading because just plain rereading or just listening passively may not be enough to help grasp concepts into your memory. Therefore, you need to practice recall and testing yourself by summarizing key ideas of what you just read. Or better yet, try teaching it to someone else. This method will help you remember better and even get a better understanding of what you're trying to learn. Research works by Jeff Karpicki from Purdue University has found that rereading is ineffective and not a productive way of studying and results only in time wasted. A more preferable method is by doing recall. You should practice this method in different locations when learning something new. This is because certain environment can act as subliminal cues to trigger your memory. Such as studying at home, you can remember, but arriving at school or in the exam room, you can't because you're in an unfamiliar setting. If you have time, you should practice recall in different places, like the cafe or the library. This will help you rehearse your memory in various surroundings, making it easier to recall information in any location. The fifth method is sleep. Sleep on it. Sleep is important in learning because it is a way of removing unnecessary information from your brain. Sleep is great for your brain to make connections with what you have learned. If you're learning something new, try to think of a concept you want to understand or a problem you want to solve before going to bed. You may just find yourself waking up with the answer.
Sleep does more than just allow your brain to wash away toxins. It's actually an important part of the memory and learning process. It seems that during sleep, your brain tidies up ideas and concepts you're thinking about and learning. It erases the less important parts of memories and simultaneously strengthens areas that you need or want to remember. During sleep, your brain also rehearses some of the tougher parts of whatever you're trying to learn, going over and over neural patterns to deepen and strengthen them. Sleep has also been shown to make a remarkable difference in your ability to figure out difficult problems and to understand what you're trying to learn. It's as if the complete deactivation of the conscious you in the prefrontal cortex at the forefront of your brain helps other areas of your brain start talking more easily to one another, allowing them to put together the neural solution to your learning task while you're sleeping.
In summary, our brains need to forget some things in order to reorganize and cut out the unnecessary information from our lives. In learning, we need to have spaces in between so that we can forget some things, so for the next time we remember that specific information, our memory will be much stronger. Therefore, forgetting is a way to help strengthen our learning. Over time, we will start losing information out of our memory. Therefore, we need to practice with different methods to help us retain what we learned. You should use these recommended techniques. Interleave with one another with space in between them to help you strengthen your memory. Practice memorize repetition. Rehearse the information immediately after learning something new. Review again after taking a break from the first review after about 15 to 20 minutes. Revisit after 6 to 8 hours from initial learning. And lastly, review again after 24 hours from first learning. Spaced repetition. Practice a little bit each day instead of cramming all at once. Interleaving practice by combining different subjects, alternating the arrangement of topics back and forth. Recall and test practice by recalling and testing yourself. Try reading and then closing your eyes to see what you can remember. Or try writing down on a piece of paper based on what you've understood and passing on that knowledge to others by teaching or talking. Sleep. If you can't figure something out, go to sleep or take a nap. You may just wake up with the answer. Geniosity can be created miraculously overnight, but geniosity that will remain with us forever requires constant effort of continuous practice in learning.